So, Mark, you do very well for not being prepared. So, it happens to all of us. Thank you. Together again. This summer has been a rebirth in so many ways. The Rumsell week is always an experience, but this week was especially special. We had no shortage of volunteers like we sometimes do in the past. Many of my normal support tasks were voluntarily taken on by others, which gave me space just to be with people. The connections and energy and conversations between young and old and everywhere in between was simply inspiring. Like coyotes and badgers, we were on a mission together again. Coyotes and badgers are normally very different from one another and often do not mingle, as you know. Human beings have their differences too, which often limit our interactions. Our unique perspectives on the world often leave us entrenched in our own bunkers. For example, why did the chicken cross the road? Well, there are predictable responses depending on who you ask. Joe Biden would say, well, like Rocky Balboa, I am a fighter. I have fought my whole life for the chickens in Pennsylvania and now the U.S. I will not give up fighting for the chickens on the road. Donald Trump would say, there was no collusion. He might add, I don't believe we need to get the chickens across the road. I say we give the road to the chickens and let them decide. Barack Obama would say, well, there is hope for the chickens. As long as we stay together, we can all get to the other side. And of course, the youth have their own set of responses. Why did the chicken cross the road? Well, the junior highs might say, it depends if there was pizza or donuts involved. The senior high youth would say, sup, chicken? Or that's what she says. Don't ask about that one. And college students would say, perhaps, I don't know, but is that going to be on the exam? We all have our different perspectives on the motive of the chicken. And we are often limited, and we limit ourselves by our own shallow views of the world around us. Today, I want to talk about the moments when we have experienced significant change in our own perspectives and in our lives. Portland author Brian Doyle tells this story about change. Committed a sin yesterday in the hallway at noon. I roared at my son. I grabbed him by the shirt collar. I frightened him so badly that he cowered and wept. And when he turned to run, I grabbed him by the arm so roughly that he flinched, and it was the flicker of fury and pain across his face. The bright anger, body, riveting face I've loved for 10 years. It was that fear that sent him snarling into the night. And I can never get that out of my mind. It torments me. Doyle says, I do not know how sins are forgiven. I grasp the concept. I admire the genius of the idea. I suspect that it is the seed of all real peace. But I do not understand how foul can be made fair. No God can forgive what we do to each other. Only the injured can summon that extraordinary grace. Doyle goes on to tell the story. The instant I let go of my son's arm, he sprinted and went away, slammed the door, and ran down the street, and I stood there simmering in my shame. Then I walked down the hill into the laurel thicket of dancing silent as dawn as the world, and I found my son there sobbing. We knelt together in the moist green dark for a long time, not saying anything, the branches burly impatient. Finally, I asked quietly for his forgiveness, and he asked for mine. And we walked out of the woods, hand in hand, changed men. Changed human beings. Change that was not planned, but because someone took the first step, realized what they had done and the wrong that they did, took the first step, made change happen. Sometimes that's all it takes. Just reaching out to another, being vulnerable, together again. Our American culture suggests that change can be willed, can be thought through, can be planned for, and organized around. And some change can be like that. I don't deny that. But I am struck by how often real change comes after an event or a shock in our way of life, a jolt that jars us out of our habits. This year and a half of COVID was such an event. It takes energy, some force, so often to shift us off of our dimes, to break our bodies of heart and mind, to open us up to new possibilities and new hope. Let me ask you this, how do you see the world differently today than you did 2 years ago? I believe George Floyd's murder was that kind of event that shocked many white Americans, a shock that called millions out into the streets and thousands to examine their white privilege. In my own life, it took a stroke to get me to slow down and change my values, to convince me finally to listen once again to the call of ministry. I'd been working so hard to get my PhD and working full time and an additional internship long ago now. But I remember vividly the shock to my system when I finally had to accept that I could not do it on my own. I remember that it took that shock to make me realize that I needed to be together again. It was that event that became a blessing as I hobbled myself into this community and prepared to adopt children, Sierra and Tony. My life was forever changed. I am reminded of the loggerhead turtle story as told by Barbara Brown Taylor in her book, Leaving the Church to Find God. It's the story of a turtle stranded on the beach but later rescued by a park ranger and dragged back to the ocean. Taylor writes, sometimes God's blessing does not come until daybreak. After a full night of emptying ourselves and wandering in the wrong direction. I have told my story from the pulpit before. I say it again because we collectively have just lived through a huge shock. A full night of emptying ourselves, a devastating shock to our systems, our personal systems and our collective systems. This pandemic, these past 15 months, called so many things into question. How and where do we work? What do schools really look like? How should we shop? How do we socialize? How we do church? Not to mention all of the losses that we need to grieve. We have been jolted out of so many habits. And now that we are together again, we have a chance to make changes in the way we treat each other, in the way we see each other. We have the opportunity to approach life differently. The opportunity to let others in like never before, to change our perspectives, to become vulnerable. I had the opportunity to sit down with Denise King, formerly known as Denise Scheidler, this last week. Denise was a member of the youth group when I first arrived in 2006. Denise went on our first mission trip to Spokane in 2007. In fact, it was Denise and 6 other students and Audrey Scheidler as the leader that asked if we could return to Spokane every other year instead of it just being a one and done event. They believed that it was important for us to maintain our connection in Spokane because of the vitally important ministry of the West Central neighborhood. They were internally and forever changed. I believe that mission trips are a catalyst for change, not because of what we do or accomplish, but because of what happens inside of us. And just as important, because of the relationships that we build and nourish. It is an opportunity for sure for us to see how poor people live and function. But we also realize that those of us in the middle class who may not be in poverty when it comes to material possessions, perhaps live in a different kind of poverty when it comes to our perspectives, our way of life, and the way we view others. I remember one boy in particular, Sean, when I was the youth director in Sandpoint, Idaho. Here was a kid that was a complete troublemaker, even more than Tony is. Other parents were lobbying for this kid not to go on the mission trip to Mexico. He would only mess it up. He wasn't serious. Well, I made sure he went. And when he came back, he asked if he could preach a part of the sermon at our youth Sunday. I will never forget what he said. He said, "We Americans look at those Mexicans and we think those poor Mexicans, they don't have anything." But then he said, I was wondering if they don't look at us and say those poor Americans, they don't have anything. Sean became a catalyst for change in the youth group and for us to do so much more mission and service work than we had been doing. He was forever changed. Mission work is about taking the first step toward others. To be sure, the issues surrounding poverty and food and housing insecurity are massive. And we will discover that this week. We don't have all the answers. And we certainly should not have our own agenda. We simply make ourselves available and, even more importantly, vulnerable so that change can take place in us. And maybe, just maybe, in others along the way. Barbara Brown Taylor offers these words: "Our job is to struggle with the terrors, neither surrendering or stealing away until they have yielded their blessing." It may seem that the people we serve on a mission trip are in but desperate need, and that may be true. But it is also true that we are the ones in desperate need. Now that we are together again, a community of support and purpose, don't let the world pass you by without examining your life, your practices, and your calling. Together again. It is time for us to recognize whether coyote or badger, we belong to one mission together. Together again. Now is the time to step forward with the person or persons you may have hurt. Now is the time to step up and make things right. Together again. The shock of this pandemic has changed our perspective forever. Now is the time to do something about it and right the wrongs of injustice wherever we see it. And for those going to Spokane this week, together again. Pay attention. Pay attention to yourselves, each other, and especially those you meet. Make a new friend. Make 2 new friends. Practice forgiveness. Take the first step. Be open to the shock of this new experience and let it change you and mold you into someone who is deeper and more compassionate. And as I've shared with youth for over 30 years of leading mission trips, be the change you want. to see. So why did the chicken really cross the road? Duh. To be together again with coyotes and badgers, because that is how life should be. And to do what needed to be done. Let us do likewise. Amen.